the most radical change I probably was involved with on the I think previously was probably the RBS, what they called Capital Resolution, or in the colloquial terms, the bad bank. It was basically making a large part of RBS first regionally in Asia. Please stop me anytime when I'm going into the wrong tangent here. But what I'm telling you,
No,
the largest part was basically the unwind of the Asian. It started off with the unwind of the Asian, well, literally all operations. They have left out 200 people when we kicked off this thing. It was 17,000 people. So it was a large regional unwind of a complex organization, locations, product, clients, staff-wise. And it also then ended up in the last 2 years doing the same stuff globally in London, basically making sure that what in not Asia, but the rest of the world was not relevant, also basically disappeared, but not in a way of taking a dead portfolio and just trying to sell it, but it's basically running it as a live bank, because that's what it was. It was segregated from the main bank, and then it was a large part of the work was to manage while we are unwinding the live clients, the live staff, the live countries, the live regulators, and that's, I think, was probably what I was described as the most radical part of running it. So I was previously mostly dealing with more what I call static restructurings. You have something which you know it is, and you have to either sell it or you have to change it, but making sure it's actually running literally a live bank, and then making sure it still shrinks in the speed and size. Well, shrink was probably the most complex change that I was involved with.
So you were at the top of that, sort of driving that change, but you were obviously tasked with that from corporate head office, I suppose.
Okay, the line's getting a little bit weak right now. I mean, I don't know if anything on my side changed, but
no, it sounds like
now it's better. Maybe just a little bit far away from the.
Yeah, I think the speaker, the microphone drifted away a bit. Let me hold it closer to my mouth.
No, it's perfect again. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. So obviously you're deeply involved in leading that change, but presumably the strategic instructions to do that in Asia came down from corporate head office.
Yeah, so the strategic decision to stop something which was not deemed to be strategically go forward and what came indeed from corporate head office. Although when we in the region came on board as a management team, we basically played back that the organization has a large amount of low or negatively performing assets, clients, and liabilities, and therefore there needs to be something done. So yes, we were not completely innocent in driving what the outcome was, but the eventual decision was indeed a head office decision. Although how to do it, how to literally take something which is live and keep it alive for a few years, because it wasn't an overnight execution, was then really new for the bank as well. So indeed, it's a strategic head office decision.
Perfect.
We then had to build some kind of plan, and then how to do it, because it hasn't been done before, and therefore it was a bit new for everybody. But that's the right starting point. It was a head office decision. Yeah.
So that fits with sort of my next question, and the lead into that is, some commentators say the most challenging position during change is being a divisional or a unit manager stuck between the three conflicting elements of 1, delivering the change, 2, managing the messages back up to head office, and 3, supporting their people. So I'm guessing, but I'd better ask, does that resonate with you at all?
It does resonate, although I think for me there is one much larger conflict or challenge before you come to these three challenges. And that in my mind is when you have a large change going through, like what the RBS, for example, was, quite often it has massive conflict to the part of the organization that is not changing. So in our case, there was a go-forward bank, and there was bank which was supposed to be changed, or the parliament was supposed to be unwound and being dealt with. And that separation between what actually is not to be touched and what is to be touched, if that is not done properly, quite often conflicts come from all ends. I'll give you a few examples. If in RBS we would have not separated up front and really ring-fenced whatever is in scope for the transformation, there would have been this constant optionality play in place from people in the Go Forward bank saying, oh, wait, before you get rid of that one, maybe we can still do something with it. Oh, wait, before you close that country, maybe we can still use a license. Oh, wait, before you do anything to that type of staff numbers, maybe they can do something for us. So you would have constantly had scope retrading being done on the basis that there are some people around in the not affected bank, which I would call it, I call them option traders. They want to have free optionality. They see something being changed, but let's pick some cherries before it actually happens, and let's see if that actually helps me as the manager on the other side to do something with it. And therefore, if we would have allowed that, if we would have allowed a constant scope retrading because some people see a free option being presented, then that option premium would have become payable by the unwind people ourselves, because we would have constantly had to rescope and retrade. That's very, very difficult. So to answer your question, I agree. Yeah. The reporting up to head office, the actual execution, and the constant conflict between those is obviously there, but it can be mitigated by a large degree if upfront there's a very clear scope definition, either in a positive way, saying this is what needs to happen, and then we can build something, or this is what is there, needs to be unwound. It doesn't really matter which way the transformation or change program goes, but I think separation of management, separation of the actual exercise from areas that are not affected, in my mind, is extremely important. Otherwise, it becomes very hard for the people who will run change or transformation to actually deliver it. It becomes then really a more a bouncing ball for other interested parties who might have completely different targets.
That's really interesting. And so how did that go? Was that boundary set and unmoving, or did you find in practice it moved?
So we set the boundary clearly in quite generic terms, because those countries, those products, those clients, those staff members are in scope for the well, in this case, unwind bad bank. And there was actually from the very beginning a very clear message sent, which at the beginning was a bit hard for everybody, because it was basically as you guys as staff members will all lose your job. Before you lose your job, please make sure that you do the following things before you go. And some of you might be here for quite some time because there's quite a lot of things to be doing. But generally speaking, you all lose your job. You clients, you no longer go forward. So get used to the fact that we won't service you anymore. We will treat you fairly until we have offboarded you, but until then, rest assured you're no longer a go forward client, and so on, right? So that separation was indeed taken up front very, very seriously. And not that we actually were the smartest people in the world to know this in advance, but this was, I think, the biggest saving grace to pull something as complex as this through, because otherwise people would have either had very unclear expectations for what it means for themselves. You mentioned in your point, staff management is very important. I fully agree. If people are not clear what's in it for themselves, both in what's the end state of whatever change happens in a positive or negative way, and what am I supposed to do in the meantime while this train is coming my way, then this becomes extremely hard to manage people. So clarity of deliverable upfront to staff then makes, if that is in place, makes then the messaging and the managing of a lot of teams so much easier. At the same time, if the scope overall is clear and you can work with some kind of golden source of starting point, the messaging to head office is pretty much easier, because you can play back, this is where we started and this is how we get along. Now, don't get me wrong. We had what we call discovery risk all the way along. So we found new things that you weren't aware about for some reasons, literally years into the program, because it was the complexity of the beast that some things were upfront not as clear, especially when it came to the systems world and the interaction between go forward and unwind. So that was then in some instances leading to interesting outcomes when it came to message to head office, because, well, it was simply adding to scope, not by bad intent, but simply for some reason nobody knew. It became only clear once you come to the very end step of something. Oh my God, that's here as well. We didn't have an idea about. Let's not think what we do about it. And that's kind of where the head office management then is clearly potentially disrupted because they see something new coming up, which why the heck did nobody do this in advance? Why are you coming with this two years down the line and presenting us this challenge now? Well, that's clearly, I think, where big transformation programs have a very different risk profile, and the risk appetite needs to be different. So we label discovery risk as the biggest risk we have to manage, and set a risk appetite not at zero, but at clearly higher at zero, but have a strong mitigation then around it. Again, once this whole risk framework and risk appetite discussion becomes tailored to what the change program is, again, it's a different profile than the Go Forward Bank, but it's still very manageable. But that's probably my second explanation why separation is so important, because the risk profile and the risk acceptance and the risk mitigation of what is happening in an unwind scenario or a change scenario versus what happens in a BAU scenario is materially different, and therefore, if those things don't get separated, you have a hard time managing it probably, because the conflicts come from, well, the Go Forward Bank has a different risk appetite towards hits the bottom line. They were very allergic. They want to have a positive effect. Whereas in an unwind scenario, you might as well have an appetite to take higher losses because it might accelerate the unwind, and therefore in the end become cheaper and better than sitting on it for a long time. So that's I think multiple reasons why the separation is important. But once you have it, the management of the staff, the management of the head office becomes, in my mind, an easier process. Not easy, but I guess nobody would expect it anyhow.
I wouldn't expect it to be easy at all. It's interesting as you explain that. I'm thinking you're making it sound quite straightforward, but it couldn't have been. How was it? How was it? Telling the I think so. When we started out, there was an expectation which nobody knew better was a lot of things that we're having we will be able to sell. There must be people out there who are interested in our assets, our locations, our licenses, our people. This must be therefore the most obvious way to reduce size fast and get out of risks in a way that is most happy. So let's just try to find other people who are willing to take what we have, and then we'll just organize the sale, the handover, whatever it might be. It turned out that besides a few portfolios which are really trading anyhow as loan portfolios in the secondary market, hardly anything could be sold. No, we didn't sell a single license. We didn't sell a single infrastructure. We didn't sell a single system, because the complexity to untangling that from the rest of the bank was so enormously complex that the transition costs from one bank to another was simply not worth the effort to do. So we would rather say that, okay, let's just shut it down. Yeah. It was very hard to manage because the clients were saying, oh, wait a moment, why can't you sell our portfolio to whatever, XYZ bank? And then give them your license in Indonesia, and then we can all move on. No. I've been.
It's not going to happen that easy.
Yeah, no. I've been involved in deals before I came to EY, and unwinding the IT and unwinding the pension funds, separating them out.
Yeah,
complete nightmare. Nightmare.
You mentioned pension funds was one of, and some of the pensions, some specific pension funds, India, certain countries, they haven't finished yet. There's still a tail ongoing, which people can't get out of. So you're right. So that is something which I think was probably we can not expect, and created a new challenges to make sure that people accept why we are not going down the selling route, and why we had to tell people, look, guys, well, we thought we might have within 3 months or 6 months the answer. You guys are no longer RBS, but you are now XYZ Bank. It's not going to happen, but you're going to be here for another 1.5 years to unwind what is there. People had a hard time intuitively understanding why that was the route taken in most instances. Yes, we sold large aviation portfolios, shipping portfolios, bond portfolios, liquid assets, no problem. Derivatives, on the other hand, we didn't sell hardly anything. We did lots of compressions, but nothing was really sold because nobody has a big interest to put on generic derivatives, which can be created anyhow if you want to do it in the market directly. So a lot of upfront assumptions were over time quite fast revised. And that's another thing that I think is also important besides separation, having a very, very clear assumption tracker. Because if a big assumption changes, and everybody's clear what initially this assumption was when it was there originally in the first place, what decision it drove. And when we change the assumption, okay, what decision do we have to review now? And then it becomes much more difficult to go through and then make sure that things which have been maybe assumed to be right at the beginning suddenly change, and what actually does that mean for the program. And quite often I see this not only in this large program, also in smaller ones that I run afterwards. Assumptions quite often are being made implicitly, not being written down, not being clarified, and it's very hard to hold people together to actually make their plans aligned to what actually reality becomes being. If assumptions are ready to match, well, you have to adjust your plans, and so that's always a hard one, the further you're down into the program, I guess.
You're making it sound incredibly logical and planned. I mean, how did corporate must have been very disappointed when they thought they were going to be able to sell off bits of the business, and then you were having to go back to them and say, sorry, that's just not going to happen. It's too complex to decouple these things. How did they react to that?
Well, they clearly had a reaction which was initially when it happened when we came for the first time to this. I think the first thing was thinking about our China operation. We're in China with a legal entity. We thought legal entity that must be sellable very easily.
Yep.
It's actually shares. You can transfer shares.
Get it?
It must be like an M&A deal.
Yep.
Can't be anything easier like that.
Yep.
The fact that most clients of that legal entity are actually otherwise corporate clients of the bank and other pieces of it as well, and untangling the legal documentation, the ISDAs, the JINRAs on the one hand, on the other hand, the systems which the entity uses are integrated with the rest of the bank. When we played it back, why we are saying this is not sellable, actually we realize, well, yeah, there's a logic behind there, but it was clearly at the beginning a bit of a sticker shock because it increased timelines quite a bit to actually go through this. People didn't expect necessarily to have 3-4 years of work underway, or maybe more expecting half that. But at the end, then people saw that the tail is quite long, but the magnitude of the tail can be reduced by other measures quite fast. Getting out of risk itself, putting an entity or a business unit or a country risk flat very fast, and then unwinding it is actually at the end maybe time-wise not as quick as thought, but risk and price-wise actually potentially better than having a fire sale which then doesn't get the greatest price in the first place, and execution becomes maybe quite topical. I don't know if that is so visibly to the external. RBS had a second big program underway at the same time while they're at the bad bank, and this was the European Union mandated. And this is I'll use the word clusterfuck in the end. The execution. The EU mandated RBS to sell off, I think, 300 branches of the UK network to other competitors to get certain elements of support for the overall corporate strategy. The Williams and Glyn network it was called, and that project went completely haywire because that was indeed trying what we later then turned out was virtually impossible. They tried to sell part of the bank, and it was a mandated sale by the EU Commission, and it failed. This was $2 to $3 billion of cost sunk in the end. And
2 to 3 billion. Because did you say billion?
Billion, yeah, billion. The project consumed thousands of people for 2.5 years and didn't achieve anything. They haven't sold it until today yet. I mean, they're just about getting it done with Metro Bank now in a much smaller way, but it was a program to sell wholesale the systems, everything, and in the end it just wasn't possible. So we had luckily that experience just in front of us. So we didn't have too much of a headquarters saying why the heck are we not trying harder.
Everything's relative, isn't it? Everything's relative. Yeah. Okay, yes. So because in similar circumstances, not without that clusterfuck in front of you, what commentators and researchers say is it's quite frequent that the divisional leader or the project leader, especially if it's divisional people, get accused of being resistant to change. It all becomes a personal thing that they're failing as opposed to a situation around them. And they get very much blamed by corporate. It sounds like you, given the scale and everything, you had less of that than perhaps might have been expected.
We had less of that because in the end, it was very clear from the beginning. There was that early message saying, guys, you are all here to work yourself out of a job. So this was in this case a more extreme scenario than other projects where the target is, let's change something, and at the end then hand it back to BAU, and then hopefully together with BAU this product then delivers a better outcome. This is different, and I had another project afterwards, which was property for RBS, which was more affected by what you're explaining, because in the end, division and management, especially if they are project lead and managing both the BAU go forward business and whatever change they want to impact, are clearly having the failure of a project fully written over their face, SCV, whatever you call it. But at the same time, the upside of having it delivered is kind of like taken for granted. So it's a very, in my mind, weird scenario where you literally start out with a scorecard of 100 and everything goes wrong, just reduces your score. But where's the upside? Yes, you can deliver faster, you can deliver cheaper, but that is very, very rarely expected. So kind of delivering everything on time and on budget is 100 points. Well done, great. And everything that goes wrong brings your scorecard on. That's what I see quite often as the expectation for change. And that's not a good outcome. I wouldn't like to run a business where I mean towards the beginning of the year. And by the way, your best scenario is your starting point. It can only go downhill from here.
Yeah.
But that's how implicitly many programs I've seen many programs being structured like this. That the incentive really is, if it goes wrong, it's your fault. If it goes right, well, fantastic. You were supposed to deliver well. No business runs like that. Everybody, normal business says, okay, you start at 50. If you do it very well, you have upside. If you screw up, of course, you are at fault. But it's kind of like a bell curve around a midpoint. It's not this downward slope from the optimal. That I think is how I often see change very weirdly motivated. People hope to get a good outcome, but if they see the motivational mechanism of how people are being rewarded and punished for success and failure respectively, maybe we shouldn't expect too much of a different behavior than people are showing. People then become very risk adverse. If you only are downside affected, well, guess what? You prevent the downside, and to be downside risk adverse typically leads to very much less activity than if you are having. So this is for me where change column is very weirdly incentivized, and I don't know if this is not obvious in many instances, but it doesn't seem to be, because I see it happening over and over again. I mean, in the Japanese place, you see right now, it's the one thing especially which got this place. They are trying to manage everything from 100, and they have explicit balanced scorecard which started at 100.
Yeah.
And everything is just a deduction from there. Then they're wondering why people don't do anything, because they obviously are trying to protect the 100.
Very interesting point. Yeah, and I mean, there's literature about budgeting, budgeting for these big projects, and the reasons as to why they're always vastly optimistic. But it's a really good point you make, that people sort of bank that optimistic position. That's the target, and so poor guys involved in it, of course, they're just going to be marked down. They can't do better than the incredibly optimistic budgets or projections that are put in place.
Yeah. And that's what I call logical people. And then, of course, you have even worse, what I might call them moral hazard, or do you call them whatever, destructive agents who are very happily starting at a massively aggressively budgeted project, and then just say, okay, once we are in it for a certain amount of time, well, we anyhow get more money because nobody will anymore retrade on this one, which is a very bad behavior. It's really moral hazard. People are saying, I started, I know the money is not enough, I'll start anyhow, I'm not raising my voice, because if something goes wrong down the line, I will anyhow ask for more. I already know this by now. This is a behavior which is really very extremely difficult to deal with, and I call them more the silent assassins rather than the moral hazard, because it's basically people who are silent at the beginning, who know exactly something was wrong. They don't say a word because they know in the end, if they say it later on, it's kind of already concluded in their mind that they will get what they want, which is really, really hard to deal with. And calling out people who are silent at the beginning and make people to make statements. Are you in agreement? Are you agreeing what's going on? Are you all on the same assumption base? Then you can have people who might not agree. That's fine. You can deal with disagreement. And disagreement people can speak together. The people who are silent and sit around and wait for the inevitable, that's the really hard part in change to remove at the beginning as fast as possible, which I think was one of the things we were lucky with at RBS, that we could call out the people who didn't agree with what was happening, who didn't like to lose their jobs, who didn't like to get away, but also didn't say, like, I'm willing to leave with my package now, rather want to hang around and destroy the process. We got rid of those ones reasonably fast. Painful, but I think that is something which I think is also important, to remove this moral hazard. Otherwise, it will poison the well and make people over time very dismotivated when they want to do the right thing.
Yeah, so in the change that I was involved in, it's partly what started me down many years ago thinking along this piece of research is you had people who had natural conflicts. They were sort of on the change team because they'd been put there by a country management, but they didn't really want to be there. And although, so I was sort of chief of staff or number 2 on this project, although the senior partner leading it was amazing, he was amazing, and he really gave enormous periods of time to do that call-out piece, you know, to get people to be honest at the beginning. They weren't honest. And we left millions, tens of millions on the table because they were on our team, but they were like big columnists, you know. They weren't really on our team.
I can 100% see how that is affecting many larger changes. But again, if there's an awareness by management that this phenomenon exists, and just have to somehow find a way to call it out and then deal with it, then it's okay. But if there's no awareness that this actually might become a problem, then of course it becomes not only a risk, then if it materializes, it becomes a real issue.
So there's plenty of challenges for these divisional leaders or these change leaders, depending who they are. Yeah. And some commentators say that, obviously it's kind of a soft skills stuff around that would help. And some commentators say these leaders can turn to techniques in the literature, but others say that an executive coach for people in these positions could help because of the sort of intangible soft type issues that they're dealing with. Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I have a view, because I was actually, and not because of some kind of performance issue, because there was a very early understanding in our management team that most of us all had a certain management style. There are certain ways to deal with situations, deal with it, and it became pretty clear pretty early on that while there is clearly a management approach for getting on with the job, moving on at pace is required, there is, especially in these change programs, also an approach required where crisis management and a different approach to a situation is required. And some people call it, maybe you switch from a more engaged BAU model to a more command and control model in a crisis. That awareness of in which situation are we and how quickly it can change is probably something which most of us never had in that dramatic swings up and down as we had it at the beginning, first year probably of that large change program. So I personally had a coach for the first 5-6 months. We should deal with especially that, seeing how you personally adjust your management style to when the situation changes, and it just happens to change much more frequently in a complex change program than maybe it does in a normal BAU environment. And I think therefore an executive coach who can, independent of the day-to-day stuff which goes on anyhow, filter out where the real adjustments from management are required, and can by example point them out and help, I found it extremely useful, massively useful.
Massively useful.
At the beginning, it was a bit like, coach, do I need a coach? I have no performance problem. No, it's not about a performance problem. It's about the awareness of the situation in which we were all being put into, and how can we actually make sure that we're not making a mistake, especially at the early stages. There, I think coaches are very, very good because they don't have the day-to-day noise. They can focus on the spikes of exceptionalism or what might come along. I think that's where they're very, very good at.
And I'm presuming this was an external coach, or was it an internal coach?
Yeah. No. External.
External. Presumably, so they're completely independent and completely confidential.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Correct.
What was the trigger for you to actually get that coach in? What made it happen?
So for me, the trigger was my move from Asia to London. So clearly, that was another element of where there's different management styles. In Asia, we dealt with very much in every team 10 nationalities and lots of diversity in terms of teams. And we're very much used to having a lot of different opinions coming from different angles and having to manage them. I never worked in the UK or in continental Europe in my life. If you look at my CV, I started in Japan for 10 years, then Asia. And then in 2016, suddenly, after 25 years, I'm being sent to London to work in the head office for whatever time it was, 2 years. And that start, it became clear to me that this is a completely different expectation towards management in the UK context than what I've been used in Asia before. So I thought, and my boss also thought that then there's clearly an acceleration of management awareness style possible by bringing somebody externally. So it was really the move for me from Asia to London that additional external help was brought in, and I found it very, very useful.
Got it. So the trigger, and this, my belief is that this is usually the trigger for executive coaching, is someone, moving location or moving up the ladder to a new role, and that was the case in your case. It was just happy coincidence. It helped you with this big change program. Is that right?
Well, for me, it was two things. It was change of location, and it was change in ladder up. I went from regional CEO to which had about a direct team of 30, 40, to global CEO, and suddenly this was a team of a couple of hundred. So both happened at the same time. And I think you're right with what you said. The change of location, change of hierarchy level is quite often, it was in my time a trigger. And again, it helped a lot because it was situationally overlapping with the complexity of the job as well. Yeah.
Interesting. Although I coach outside of EY, I do coaching inside EY, and I coached the senior advisory partner that moved to India. He was Italian Swiss, and so he was sort of relocating to run the Indian advisory practice, or be senior there anyway. And so he was a very senior guy, not necessarily moving up the ladder, but it was a very big cultural change to move to India. Are you? What's your background, Stefan? You sound Swiss or German, but
I was born in Germany. And I went to school and university in Germany. I studied economics and Japanese, and Japanese study led after 2 years at university to a first 1 year exchange program into Japan. And literally from that onwards, I went back for another 2 years after to graduate, but from that moment onwards, I basically had a linkage into Japan. And I found my first job after university with Japan linkage. They sent me to Japan pretty soon, and that's really how it all started. So originally from Germany, studied there and then grew up there. But for all my working life up until 2016, I was always based in either Japan or Singapore. A little bit Hong Kong, but mostly Japan and Singapore.
Wow, that's fascinating. Your career's been in Asia, but you don't sound like you're from Asia. Okay.
No. I think family is Chinese, and then wife's kids are more Asian than probably European. But on the other hand, I think my language and accent doesn't really disappear.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. So some commentators, bearing in mind that you found that executive coach was useful. So some commentators have said that putting executive coaches in on people on a change, who are running a change program, rather than them themselves being promoted, would give a good ROI. And I'm involved in the coaching situation where they're trying that. But in general, in these big change programs, you bring in consultants, don't you? You bring in EY or Bain or McKinsey's. That is a given, which is great for my main employer. But no one brings in teams of coaches. It just doesn't happen. And I'm curious as to why that's never happened. Or very rare.
I don't know. I mean, you're right. The consulting help is at most stages being brought in. I mean, some places being brought in because there's an honest request to have maybe put a structure on something which a consultant maybe has seen many more times before, or they can help with some fast tracking of some certain deliverables, maybe augment the team with SMEs. That I think is all. I don't want to sound too dismissive of that approach. It's an insurance for the senior management. They maybe can say, look, we have done more than what we can do ourselves, and there's a tangible insurance value for them as individual senior managers who hire the consultant. If you bring in the coaches, I'm not too sure this gives the same insurance value for the senior management. It gives definitely a great value for the people who get coached, and in theory that should then lead towards a good outcome, a good RE for the senior managers. But I don't think they see that linkage as one-to-one, because it goes through the staff, whereas a consultant delivers something directly. The consulting paper, the write-up, whatever it might be, you can touch it. It comes directly on the consultant. You pay for it. You can say that was the idea of bringing in. Great. Whereas a staff member performing well, maybe the senior people, what you can't manage your own people. You have to have somebody to help you. It seems to be that's my only off the cuff explanation, which I can think about, that people are having less of this insurance value from a coach coming to themselves. That's my personal reason why I hire a consultant. And maybe that gives people less incentive to do that. But you're right; it's very rarely done that people bring in coaching on a program as a necessary ingredient to make it faster and better. But it might well be a good idea.
I think that's really insightful about the security piece for the chief exec or whoever it hires them in. I mean, it used to be no one ever got fired for buying IBM, didn't they? Many years ago. And these days, I mean, I was talking to someone else. They brought in McKinsey's, and then they fired McKinsey's. So of course, in that time, they could blame McKinsey's for the fact the project hadn't really got off the ground. It probably was. Not maybe the fault, but who knows? But they were the fall guys.
But in some cultures, this is ever more extreme. In the Japanese culture, the consulting insurance value is literally impossible to do away with. I mean, the fact that the balance scorecard says 100, from there it's only downwards, and everything needs to be basically put insurance protected. Having somebody to blame if something was wrong is ideal. It's perfect. So it gets budgeted right away inside from the beginning. Without even there are not even proper descriptions of job or tasks being written up. Just hire them and then let's have them. If something was wrong, it was their idea. Fine, let's just blame them, and my scorecard stays at 100 or 99 or whatever it is. So I can clearly see how that is a very, very strong motivator for some management to bring in consultants. But I'm not too sure if that is more of a weakness than a strength for some people, because it's very huge.
That's a really good insight. Really useful. Just sort of stepping back a bit, you talked about moral hazard and things like that. So, some research has shown that managers and leaders feel that organizational politics is both a blocker and an enabler in change. Do you think internal politics plays a part?
Well, it does, of course. But again, for me, internal politics is nothing else but quite often it's a strong reflection of how people are incentivized. If you incentivize, what's a good example? If you have an organization who wants to bring different pieces, divisional or entity or different group companies closer together and make them work better together, then clearly it's observed not only rarely but maybe more often than not that the divisional politics are overarching the delivery because people want to stay by themselves, they want to protect the little empire, and that's all then being called politics. Now, if the divisional managers having a reward system where they're being rewarded for the bottom line of the entity and not being rewarded for the outcome of what it might come afterwards, well, why do we expect something else than a divisional politics? It's natural behavior. I'm a strong believer of that. If the incentive system for people is geared such that a more fragmented, a more silo view. That's probably how I would describe politics. They are more. Politics are typically an expression of a silo or a more fragmented view of an organization. Then, of course, that plays out. It's a mechanism of how people behave rationally. Why do we expect somebody to behave differently if it's his personal best to behave like this? We quite often saw this playing out in the functional support world of RBS when we tried to unwind it. It was observed that the politics of many functional support leaders, finance, tech, HR, was driven towards protecting their turf much harder than in the front office business. And it was kind of surprising at the beginning to see this. But once we realized that a manager in the support function does not get paid on bottom line enhancing performance, better P&L or less losses or more revenues, but it's being paid on the size of their teams, and that would be expected to be not protective. Yeah. If the main payment component for an individual manager is the size of his team, well, why do we expect him to reduce the size of his team? But once we then say, okay, fine, you're no longer measured on your team size, you're measured on the delivery of a smaller team, so you get smaller, and your bonus doesn't get affected, or your payouts, or your career perspective, whatever it might be, doesn't get affected, then suddenly behaviors change. So again, politics is, in my mind, quite often a reflection of the incentive system which are in place. And if these incentive systems are not being considered when change is being put in place, then I think quite often when people should not expect different outcomes. It's natural. People behave logical. Very few people behave illogical. Most people behave very logically, and it's driven by what is in for themselves. That's what I said earlier. Once the message was clear, in our exchange program, you lose all your job, but you get properly rewarded for doing it. Then it was clear what the incentive was. It was a very different incentive mechanism than saying you are here to create your job for eternity, and the bigger the team is, the more you get paid. That would have been not delivered anything. So, yeah, I agree with the politics statement to a certain degree, but again, very few people do political silo, fragmental approaches for the sake of it. There's something in for themselves. That's driven by how they're incentivized.
Thank you for that. And so my last question now, very related to what we've just been discussing, which is other research suggests that the more Machiavellian leaders are not always enthusiastic to get their or other people coached to be fully equipped to understand what is going on and have the ability to push back. Does that seem likely to you that would be true? Or?
Well, a Machiavellian leader or a leader who's insecure might be the same. Clearly doesn't want to have empowerment of their own people being with them. Maybe they're worried about themselves looking bad. Yeah. Again, what is somebody who is a Machiavellian leader? Somebody who, again, that does behave badly because of his own personal pleasure to be a bad guy, or because he might see it as a protection mechanism to not have rivalry coming up and then good people suddenly overtaking him. It's a question of.
That's a great point, Stefan.
Self-confidence, right? I mean, if somebody behaves badly, quite often it is because behaving transparently and friendly might make them look like not as competent people as they want to be seen like. That's what I observe quite often.
Just reminds me of when I was FD for the UK firm, and then you had like regional FDs under that, and there was one guy, I kept saying, you've got to hire better people underneath you. And I think you're right, he was just insecure. In the end, we let him go anyway, because he just didn't do the job, you know. But I think it was insecurity. No, so not only Machiavellian, but insecurity could get in the way. That's an excellent point.
But I think that there's one way to deal with this in change programs, and that is when you actually lock down. Again, I talked about assumptions already. That's the starting point. But when you lock down very diligently what people are saying and create basically in your program reports nothing else but the mirror picture of what people have said, it's very hard for somebody to consistently get away with if the message is really not a good one. Because in the end, they're building their own mirror image. If suddenly the mirror image looks very poor, you can say, look, guys, it's not me saying that you're not performing. It's your own delivery which doesn't look good. So don't blame the messenger, blame yourself. And again, it requires from a program management, not because it's technical, a lot of diligence of recording what people have really said. Have they changed their assumptions? Have they changed their actual actions? Have they changed timelines? Have they changed targets and the numerical targets? If you can track those changes, even if they might be gradual over time, and then play back, guys, you moved the goalpost, or you started to deliver towards a different assumption, which you over time implicitly changed, but nobody really called you out. And then you can paint pictures of people who are behaving badly because they have maybe different motivations. It's those people who are poisoning the well. Yeah.
Is there any benefit in that stage having coaches involved to help the people? Obviously, being diligent, writing it down is a mechanical thing, but not let people off the hook at the end of the conversation.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, again, I think if you have people who actually do want to get to the outcome that they realize, if I'm not being let off the hook, I get something beneficial for them and myself, and that's okay. But there are situations, again, I'm coming to my silent assessments, if people are by themselves working towards a different outcome, then I'm not too sure whether the coach necessarily will help with that. Then maybe it's more a matter of making sure that there's a very clear and potentially painful discussion with those people saying, look, guys, what you're doing ain't going to help. Here's the evidence of what you're doing, and therefore it might be better if you go. Yeah. So I think distinguishing between where a coach can really make a difference because there's still some ability for getting a good change outcome, but also deciding where it would be just simply impossible and getting people off the pitch, especially if they are massively destructive in their behavior. Then I think for the latter groups, I think coaching might not be the right one. Then it's better to have a clear method. And
it's more coaching the people that have to deal with those groups, isn't it? That they, coaching them to have that tough decision earlier, to make that judgment earlier, to hold those people to account. I don't think I'm Machiavellian, but I wouldn't want to put resources into someone who's massively disruptive. I'd rather see him out the door.
No. We're on the same page. I mean, So what I put was for performance management, I think a coach wouldn't be the best one. To have a manager coach to do good performance management is absolutely valuable.
We are exactly on the same page.
The questions you asked about coaching are extremely useful. I don't know if there's a different coaching style required for different locations or cultures. I mean, location cultures might be the same word for what I'm. Whether coaching in Asian context or coaching in the European American context might be different. I don't know.